Nope, great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Judy, for that kind introduction. Thanks, everyone, for being here and listening to me for a little while this afternoon. I do want to echo what Judy said in talking about the Amtrak-Siemens partnership. It's incredibly important to us. The new locomotives they built for our Northeast Corridor regional service have been a big help and a great success, and we're grateful to you and all of the fine folks at Siemens for doing that. Let me also thank Norm and all of the team at CGLA for inviting me to speak today. I wanted to speak to you today about, and I'm going to quote here, the very real, very pressing, very urgent, and I edited out a few varies, infrastructure needs that we have on the Amtrak system. And to make the case to all of you, as you've already heard from Judy, that we are in fact ready to build and advance on a lot of these projects today. Our job at Amtrak, put very simply, is to deliver the rail passenger transportation that the Congress and the states deem to be in the public interest, and to deliver that product, that transportation, as safely, efficiently, and effectively as we can. And as Judy said, I think some of the numbers bear that out. We had a fourth consecutive year of record ridership, over 31 million people. We covered 94% of our operating cost, which is a remarkable number, matched by very few, if any, passenger rail systems around the world. And I think that's a great indication of where Amtrak is today and the path we're on. The other important thing, as I think many of you know, is that we are looking to the future. We have contracted with Alstom to deliver the next generation of high-speed trains, the next set of Acellas, 28 trains. They're going to, is this booming, or is it just, am I just being too emphatic? Yeah. Both. I'll step away and still try to be emphatic. 28 trains going to be manufactured in Hornell, New York. That's more trains. 28 as compared to 20, 40% more trains. That gives us a third more passenger seats, still with the same level of comfort and personal space. More service. We'll be able at peak to run half-hour service between New York and Washington, and hourly service between Boston and New York. Better amenities, better Wi-Fi, which we've already implemented on the existing Amtraks. Better things like electrical outlets, better design, better cafe car, and a better ride quality, comparable to the ride quality that you would feel in Europe. This is a good idea, obviously, for everyone in this region, but it's a good idea for America because investing in Amtrak produces not only a more efficient corridor, but a more efficient Amtrak, and it creates American jobs. It promotes the use of American products and services, and it generates economic activity all up and down the supply chain. We're approaching our 46th anniversary. As you'll hear, a lot of the equipment as well as our infrastructure, it's the end of our useful life, and that's time to do something about that. But in talking about Amtrak in general, I'll just say in closing that we're focused on improving our safety culture, as you heard, and safety and a great safety culture is the foundation for any great company. We're focused on improving operational efficiency. We need to drive that 94% number higher. Obviously, we're focused on our customer experience because every great company pays attention to its customers and their needs. And finally, we are focused on investment in our assets. So let me talk about investment in our assets for a little while and talk about some of the critical infrastructure projects that we're ready to advance. And I'm going to talk for a little while. We're going to have some pictures. Train pictures are always a great thing. We're going to have some video. We're going to have a big cake roll out and a Siemens locomotive jump out. I mean, it's going to be kind of a visual extravaganza. So let me try and race through it. First of all, let me talk for a minute about the corridor. There we go. The Northeast Corridor from essentially Richmond, Virginia now, up through D.C. and all the way to Boston. It's an extraordinarily complex rail operation, by far the most complex rail operation in this country, and really matching in complexity to anything across the world. It's not only complex, but it has these two major challenges in front of it. One is the infrastructure, and the other is the growing demand for our services. So, from the standpoint of us as the owner, it's 457 miles. We own about 350 of it. There are 60 miles north of New York that are owned and operated by Metro North. And then the state of Massachusetts actually owns the right-of-way inside of Massachusetts, but we operate and maintain it. The Northeast region, as I think you all know, is hugely important to this country. The Northeast Corridor region generates about $3 trillion in annual economic output. 17% of the U.S. population and 20% of the gross domestic product are produced on 2% of the landmass of the United States. It links 4 of the top 10 major urban centers in the nation. We handle about 2,200 trains a day. About 150 of those are Amtrak intercity. The balance are 40 to 60 freight trains, and then the rest are commuters. And we have 8 commuter lines that operate on the corridor. So it's hugely busy. It handles about 750,000 passengers a day. From an economic standpoint, it's estimated that the absence of the Northeast Corridor would cost the economy about $100 million a day. And we estimate today that service disruptions along the NEC already probably cost about $500 million in economic output per year. Finally, the corridor needs about $500 to $600 million a year just to kind of maintain it along the status quo and make some, what I would describe as incremental improvements to really put it in a state of good repair, as you heard earlier, and to do all the work that needs to be done, it would cost about $30 billion. Now, why is that? And as you'll hear over and over, many of the key assets on the corridor are over a century year old. The basic infrastructure, just the catenary and the track and all of those things are about $11 billion. And then if you look at the major projects, and let me just go through them, you can see up in the far right of that slide, those are 5 bridges in the years that they were built. And each of those ranges from several $100 million to well over $1 billion. Connecticut, Devon, Saugatuck, Susquehanna, Bush, and Gunpowder rivers. We have 2 major tunnel projects I'll talk about. One in Baltimore, south of the station, called the B&P tunnels, as well as the 2 new tubes that we absolutely have to have under the Hudson River. So that's kind of a brief look, and you can see what demand looks like in terms of our estimates that 260 passengers in 2005, but doubling by 2040. So here we go. We're going to do a little history lesson as well as what we have today, because I think it's instructive for a couple of reasons. The first is just the historical context in terms of the age of the assets, but there's a little message in here, I think, too, about the vision and the resolve of the people who originally built these assets. If you take yourself back to about the year 1900, in that range, and there's a great book, by the way, which you should go, if you're interested in this, you should go read, called Conquering Gotham, which is the story of the building of the Hudson River and tunnels, the East River tunnels, and the original Penn Station. But if you go back to that time, there was a gentleman named Alexander Cassatt, who was a civil engineer, and he was one of the presidents of, in fact, the legendary president of the Pennsylvania Railroad in the early 1900s. And at that time, the Pennsylvania Railroad was probably the single most powerful company in the country. He had a formidable team of engineers, and they designed and built the Hudson River tunnels and the original Penn Station. Those were completed in 1910. And those gentlemen could never have predicted what would be happening in Penn Station today. The train traffic, not only the number of trains that come in there, but the number of people that are on those trains. And there's some legacies of that for those of you, and I know many of you have been through Penn Station. Those narrow platforms weren't designed for 1,200 passengers getting off a commuter train and another 1,200 trying to get on another. But nonetheless, they built a facility that still, even though it is chock-a-block and full, works today, and it's a remarkable story. So how did he think about that, and what was his drive to do it? Well, he was a businessman, and at that time, the Pennsylvania Railroad brought all of their passengers to New Jersey, and they disembarked on the New Jersey side of the river. This is a rendering of the station where they all got off, and they all got on a ferry and went to New York. Now, the Pensie's great competitor, for those of you who know railroad history, was the New York Central, and the New York Central had a path into Manhattan, landing at Grand Central Station. And so Cassatt and the Pensie needed to find a way over the river. As I said, they landed, and here's where they ended up. This is the Manhattan side of the ferry terminal. These passengers were carried over the river in waters that were rough, choppy, and sometimes dangerous. It was not a pleasant way to get into Manhattan. And they were desperate to find a way, and they looked at a lot of alternatives, including a massive bridge, which was their initial choice on how to get over the Hudson. But the challenges with that bridge in terms of engineering, finance, and the political challenges, which were extraordinary, but in a very different way, having to do with the corruption of Tammany Hall, stood in the way of not only a bridge, but anything they wanted to do. So, interestingly enough, it was on a visit to Paris where Cassatt kind of came up with what proved to be the right concept. He was there in August of 1901, and his chief engineer, a gentleman who later became president of Pennsylvania named Samuel Ray, urged him to visit the brand new Quai d'Orsay station. Some of you, I would guess, have been to the Quai d'Orsay. It is now the major museum in Paris for impressionistic art. And the way passenger trains got there was through tunnels using electrification, and in that case, an electrified third rail. And he foresaw that possibility as possibly working in the Hudson. And after a number of years and heroic struggles, that's where we are. I'll talk a little more about those tunnels in a minute, but built in 1910, they support all of the traffic that enters Penn Station from Newark, the busiest section of railroad in North America. So, let's take a trip. How about it? Why don't we just join and board the 1 p.m. departure of Acela train 2166? It's a little late. We're a little behind time, and I apologize for that, but we're going to try to get to New York and make up that time. The arrival time is 3:46 p.m. I will assure you that what I'm saying now does not imply that I'm going to speak until 3:46 p.m. But let's take a little tour up the corridor. Let's start with Washington and infrastructure at Washington. This is, as you all know, Washington Union Station. It is a magnificent station, restored from its bedraggled state in the 70s and the 80s to be really an iconic structure, an appropriate way to enter our nation's capital and the busiest intermodal hub in the capital. A little history: in 1901, the Park Commission invited a master architect, who many of you will have heard of, and planner named Daniel Burnham, to orchestrate a sweeping city plan for Washington to make it into a true world capital. He was inspired by the work of L'Enfant, and he helped create a lot of the national monumental architecture around what is now the National Mall. And he designed this Union Station in large part to get a lot of rail lines out of what is now the mall. And this brought together the two railroads at the time served Washington, the Pennsylvania and the B&O, into one terminal. It was completed in 1908. We're the lead partner in what's called Washington Union Station's Second Century Plan. It's a comprehensive improvement initiative with both long and near-term components. Its aim is to triple passenger capacity and double train capacity by modernizing and expanding the station over the next 20 years. And it's informed by a Union Station master plan that was completed in 2012. So how are we going to expand capacity? Well, we're going to actually expand on a lower level. We're going to go underneath the existing concourse and platforms and build another set of tracks and platforms. We're also going to build new and enhanced entrance points into the station. We're going to widen the platforms, and we're going to have a lot more passenger amenities and retail space. And ultimately, there will be a 3 million square feet mixed-use development over the air rights of the platforms in Outback called Burnham Place. It's a really exciting plan. This is the near-term part, a modernization of the concourse. I won't ask for a show of hands who's been in the concourse recently, or how many of you were depressed when you went in there, but it's going to be a lot better, and soon. We're going to alleviate a lot of the crowding. We're going to double its currently capacity and improve access. We're going to enhance passenger comfort. We're going to new seating, new lighting, new Metropolitan Lounge, new architectural finishes, and natural light. And this will all be done with WMATA's improvements at First Street to create a combined and coordinated set of passenger improvements. The good news is we have the funding for this. This project is part of the $2.4 billion RIF loan that Amtrak received in order to finance the next generation of high-speed trains. These improvements are part of that, and these improvements, quite frankly, are absolutely necessary to have done by the time the new next-gen trains come online. Now let's go on up the road to Baltimore and what are known as the Baltimore and Potomac tunnels. They were built in 1873, and even tunnels eventually get to their sell-by date. It's 2 tracks, it's got curvature, it's restricted to 30 miles an hour. It's about the oldest infrastructure, with probably the exception of some culverts, on the whole NEC. And it's absolutely critical to us because 1/5 of all Amtrak trains go through these tunnels, and those trains generate about 30% of our revenue. We handle about 140 trains a day through there, Amtrak and MART commuter services, and a couple of freight trains as well. And these sharp curvature, tight clearances, and a tunnel infrastructure that's just been repaired over and over again means that we have a 30-mile-per-hour speed restriction through only 2 tracks, and it's probably one of the 2 or 3 biggest pinch points on the corridor in terms of capacity. So what do we need to do? Well, as you'll hear also with the Hudson tunnels, eventually you just can't keep patching, and we're going to have to take something out of service for a longer period of time for more substantial repairs. And even if we only take one of the 2 tracks out, the implications for that in terms of people being able to move up and down the Northeast Corridor are severe. It's a wet tunnel. It's just a place where you ride through. That's a teaser, by the way, for some video. It's just a bad place, and that's all I can say. So now comes the real question mark. Does video work? Oh, there it is. This is taken, by the way, from what we call a theater car, a car we use for inspection purposes that we put on the end of the regionals, and it has a glass rear end. So it's a great way to look at the railroad. But you can see it was just designed for another time. You can see the masonry crumbling, and I don't want to get you too depressed, but it's a key piece of infrastructure, and we have to get the work done. And the good news is, while we look at this thing, that a lot has been done along the way. The FRA, Maryland DOT, the city, and Amtrak have cooperated on an environmental impact statement as required, as all of you know, by NEPA. We screened 16 different alternatives and arrived at a decision through the process that we're going to build a 4-track tunnel system, which actually swings fairly far to the west of this thing. There's a train going through. You can see the water kind of shining at you alongside. A lot of that is leakage from the Amtrak the Baltimore City water system, I'm told. Another infrastructure issue. Big curve. And daylight at last. So, The good news is we've gone through the process. We had a record of decision for the environmental impact statement released last month. 4-track tunnel, higher speeds, better capacity, improvements in capacity at Baltimore MARC station. We addressed a lot of public comments, including the environmental concerns. We have advanced the project through preliminary design and NEPA. We now need to find funding to take the design to 100% and then actually do the construction. The estimate on the construction is $4.5 billion. And obviously we'll be pursuing that through a combination of DOT grant programs, funding from Amtrak, and the federal government and local matches. If any of you have $4.5 billion and want to do something constructive with it, please just see me a little later. We arrive in Penn Station. Baltimore Penn Station is a wonderful building. It serves the greater Baltimore region. It's a vital link, obviously, on the corridor. It has classic Beaux-Arts architecture, built in 1911, and it anchors the Charles North District in Baltimore City. It's our 8th busiest station. It serves our services, obviously, commuter operations on the Penn Line, MARC's Penn Line, City Light Rail and Bus are all at the station as well. So as part of our internal, the Amtrak Revenue Growth Initiative, which is designed to generate revenue for infrastructure renewal from assets that Amtrak owns, we're working on putting together a public-private partnership to redevelop and expand Baltimore Penn and the adjacent land parcels which we own. We are doing this in a number of locations. And as I said, the goal is money for infrastructure needs for the station, as well as trying to be an economic catalyst for the city and the area. We're on schedule to select a master developer for the project this summer. We've put an RFP out and given it to a short list of folks, that in late December, and we should be making a public announcement in the summer. But in addition, we're independently making investments in Baltimore Penn Station as well as part of the RIF loan. We will reactivate one low-level platform and construct a new one to allow the high-speed, the Acellas, to get around the regional trains. We're also upgrading 30 miles of track between Baltimore and Washington. Better capacity, better reliability, higher speed for both us and MARC. That should be done by 2021. And the station's in need of rehab, so we recently concluded the final design for fixing the station's roofing systems, and we expect to start construction on that later this year. So a lot of activity in Baltimore Penn. This is the next issue along the line. This is the bridge over the Susquehanna River. It's a 2-track bridge, therefore a bottleneck, located between the cities of Havre de Grace and Perryville in Maryland. It has the longest movable span, which you can see over to the right on any bridge on the corridor. And that movable span still has to move. As you can probably see to the left, all of the people with red jackets on to move it, which fortunately we don't have to do quite so often. I think it requires 30 people to move the span. Yeah, it's not the most efficient operation in the world. We need to fix this. We need to increase capacity, and we need to build a new bridge. What does it benefit? We'll put speed up to 160 miles an hour. As you will see when I click this and we watch this, we're going to go over the bridge, not at 160 miles an hour. We're going to get the bridge up so we don't have to have a movable structure. And when we do that, we'll also make a better navigation channel for the people who do use it. And then we will, subsequent to building the one bridge, replace the existing bridge, and then we'll have the 4-track capacity we need. And by the way, the railroad on both sides of this bridge goes from 4 to 2. So it's a definite bottleneck. The project study began in 2013. With the preliminary engineering, we should be completing the NEPA process fairly soon. We are going to try and use some of our own internal funding to advance the design further, but we just have to figure out again, how do we fund the replacement of this bridge? And the estimate to do this is well over $1 billion. I will say parenthetically, this was just Kismet. This is Perryville, where the railroad's already widened back out. From Perryville down towards Baltimore, the Norfolk Southern uses those tracks. That's a Norfolk Southern coal train. And as we rode by as a shareholder of Norfolk Southern, it made me feel good. Let's go on to Philadelphia. This is a rendering of Philadelphia 30th Street Station. It's another major station development for us. We have completed in 2016, along with several partners, the 30th Street Station District Plan. It's part of a much larger corporate initiative to leverage our asset portfolio in that part of the city, again, so that we can generate funds internally to regenerate critical infrastructure and build operational improvements that benefit our customers as well as really promote economic development in that part of town. In addition, again, we're advancing a number of projects, about $60 million worth at the station, using our funds, including restoration of the station facade. We recently renovated all the restrooms in the retail area. We're putting in new signage inside and out, and remarkably enough, we're replacing 1930s era elevator equipment and station entrance doors. And I say remarkably because, as you can tell, something was built in the 30s seems fairly recent for a lot of the corridor, but nonetheless, we're going to go ahead and change that out as well. So, here we are on the corridor in New Jersey. I thought this was an interesting shot because you're going to see we're on a regional train and we're slowly but surely being overtaken by an Acela. We would like to get the Acela to run, obviously, even faster than that. But let me talk about this area as well. Right through here, we have something that we're completing, in the process of completing, called the New Jersey High-Speed Rail Project. And that's turned out to be a very important project for us. It was done with $450 million in funding from DOT, and I'll keep clicking along. And this is it. And it's difficult to see, but there's a lot of catenary mast and there's a lot of infrastructure up there. And what we're essentially doing is doing some track improvements, but replacing the catenary, the overhead wiring, for about 23 miles in here between Trenton and New Brunswick. This area on the old Pensy was known as the Raceway, and you can see why. It's dead straight. This is a place where we can run 160, and quite frankly, the limitation has been catenary design. It's important because we have been able to try out a series of construction methods and a couple of different forms of catenary to understand what will work best for the long-term solution, because we have catenary in the corridor that's 80 to 50 years old today as well. And that's another huge need eventually that we need to take care of, again, because it limits our speed. And as some of you travel the corridor will know, in the summer it's a big problem because that's when we have the overhead wires start to expand, it starts to sag, and we start to have more and more wire issues out there. We're going to be done in 2019. We've done a lot of work out there, and with new catenary, this is what a high-speed railroad looks like. Why we're looking up, I'm not sure. So, quickly moving along, this is a rendering of the new Portal Bridge. Portal Bridge lies between Newark and Penn Station. It's one of two critical bridges that we have in that area where we're limited by capacity, and also the bridges are over a century old. The good news here is New Jersey Transit and Amtrak together have completed final design and environmental review to replace Portal with a newer, more reliable fixed span bridge. And as you can see, the new bridge is higher, somewhat higher than the old bridge, and it's high enough to get that traffic under it, that tug with the barges, which is essentially the water traffic that we have to host. Portal Bridge today hosts 450 trains a day. It's a major bottleneck. It's a source of delays. The mechanical components on the movable bridge malfunction from time to time. It's just something that's run its course. And this two-track replacement bridge, which I'm showing you the rendering of is higher level, gets rid of the movable components. It's $1.5 billion. Our partners include Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, New York Transit, Amtrak, and US DOT, and we're currently developing a funding and financing plan so that construction can proceed as soon as possible. And we completed the design process using monies from New Jersey Transit and Amtrak, and then final design was funded by a grant from the FRA. Now, as we ride over Portal up through the New Jersey area, the next plan is once the Portal North Bridge is built, we then go build a new Portal South Bridge to get rid of the old span completely. And that allows us to double the train capacity between Newark and essentially Penn Station. A lot of the infrastructure between Newark and Penn Station, the busiest part of the corridor, 450 trains a day, is double track. At its peak, we run 24 trains an hour in each direction through those tunnels. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a big part, and this is the first step. Portal North is the first step in something I'll end with, which a lot of you have heard about, which is the Gateway Project, which is our set of projects to address in a meaningful way all of the issues around Penn Station, and in particular Penn Station to the west. So, a word about why this is so important. You don't need to, this is train volume on the corridor, and the x-axis is location, right? And all you really need to know is this peak, the spike, the green and the yellow spike is Penn Station and the access into Penn Station. And you can see how busy it is. And again, on the west side of the river, we're trying to do this essentially with two-track infrastructure. So here we are, the tunnels. They look good for 1910, right? I mean, you know. I've described to you the Hudson River Tunnel Project, 450 trains a day, about 200,000 passenger trips through the North River Tunnel every day. As I said, completed in 1910. So the project concludes the design and construction of 2 new tubes, essentially a new bidirectional tunnel system serving Penn Station, and then the rehab and the modernization of the existing tunnels. Those tunnels incurred serious and ongoing damage when they were both flooded by Superstorm Sandy. That was October 12. They were inundated with salt water, and they left behind a lot of corrosive chlorides, which continued to damage the concrete tunnel liner and the bench walls, and the cable, which in some of the old cable, which we still use, is in terracotta ducts inside the concrete bench walls. So it is a huge problem for us. So here we are. The bad thing about tunnels from kind of a visual effect is that, in general, is the first time I rode the Channel Tunnel, one of the remarkable engineering accomplishments of the past 50 years, when you're on a train, it's just 30 minutes of darkness. You know, you don't see sea life. You don't get the feeling you're in anything other than the dark. And that's kind of these tunnels. But what you can see on both sides is the bench walls that are built up. And there are places, I'm not sure how much of it we'll be able to see, where you can really see the concrete starting to spall as a result of this saturation with chlorides and the deterioration of the concrete. And not only are there a lot of cables alongside the walls of the tunnel, as I said, there are cables in the bench wall. And while you can kind of see on the right-hand side in the light, there are the little, what are actually access points. When we have trouble in there, sometimes we just have to go dig that cable out to replace it, or go to the bench walls and try to run around it. And people ask about the life of the tunnel. As a lot of you know, when after Superstorm Sandy, there was an estimate made by our engineering people that they had between 10, we had between somewhere then between 10 and 20 years before we started having serious, serious problems in those tunnels. And it's not that we're going to have, the engineering projections are not that we're going to have some kind of catastrophic failure. It's just going to be the failures begin and they become more and more frequent. And at a certain point, we say, we cannot guarantee reliable service through these tunnels. And it probably won't be just one of them. They're the same age. They were flooded at the same time. It's going to create a huge issue for us when it happens. And when it happens, what we're talking about for tunnel rehab is you have to go take all that stuff out. You literally have to remove all that concrete. You have to remove all of the track and take it down. And our best estimate right now is that for each one of the tubes, it's a 1.5 year project. So it is absolutely critical if we are not going to have huge issues with access into New York, into Manhattan from New Jersey, that we get the new tunnels built before we reach the point where we cannot maintain the old. And then once we rebuild the two, we will one at a time rebuild the old. And even with 3, we will have a level of redundancy and resiliency that we don't have today. There are a lot of people that know this. Every time we go out and talk about Gateway, we talk about these issues and talk about the tunnels. The good news is the FRA is taken on the work to working with us and with New Jersey Transit to prepare the environmental impact statement. We think the environmental work will be done hopefully before mid-year next year. And up until that point, we're okay. But in terms of infrastructure funding after the NEPA process is completed sometime in the first half of next year, we will essentially be at a point where we're waiting for the funds to go ahead and finish the design and do the construction. The estimate on these tunnels is just an estimate. Right now, I think it's at about $7 billion to build the new tunnels. So, as you can tell, tunnels look like tunnels. You can't see all of it, but it's just an incredibly complex place. And this is the impact of a tunnel closure. Right now, as I said, we're at peak. I mean, we're at max capacity right now. At peak rush hours, 24 trains in each direction in the tubes, because Penn Station itself is so full from both directions that we can't put a train in a platform in Penn Station till another train leaves. Every platform is full during the rush hour. So to get New Jersey Transit in, we have to get New Jersey Transit out. If we go to one tunnel and try and run in both directions, we can get about 12 trains an hour through there, 6 in each way. Now that we've been through the tunnels, this is what we wish we arrived at. This is Penn Station, built in 1910. It was a magnificent, huge structure. It was torn down in the early 60s by people who did not necessarily have the foresight of Alexander Cassatt. And the only positive outcome, the only silver lining, unless you like Madison Square Garden there, is that that was the birth of the historical building preservation movement in New York City. And it's because Penn Station was borne down and the outcry about it that we have Grand Central today, because it was next on the list. So that's not much of a silver lining, but it is some. As I mentioned, this is the train growth since 1976. It's doubled. We run 1,300 trains a day through there. You can see a lot of LIRR, somewhat less transit, and then somewhat less NEC, and at the top a little purple, which is just our Empire service up the Hudson River in New York. 410,000 daily trips on LIRR transit and Amtrak, and then another 344,000 commuter trips through Penn. It is the busiest transportation hub of any kind in North America. Bigger than Hartsfield, O'Hare, name the airport. It is the single busiest place. And quite frankly, it's, let me just say this as nicely as I can. A lot of you have been down in there. It's a little ratty when you get down in there. Probably literally as well as figuratively, just when I think about it. So what do we do about Penn? Well, here's the good news. There's some help on the way. The first in terms of just our passengers. This is the old Farley Post Office, which is being redeveloped, and will have Amtrak's new station operations in it in the Moynihan Station. Interestingly enough, you'll see the architectural resemblance. It was almost contemporaneous with New York Penn. And in fact, it was built, and this is kind of what makes this thing work, in the days when the post office hauled all the mail by train. So it actually sits over the west end of the platforms at Penn Station. We've got a lot of work to do to improve the access down to those platforms, and it'll be at platform end rather than mid-platform, but it will at least relieve some of the crush on the concourse level and improve passenger comfort and safety. It's projected right now to be completed in late 2020. The work is already underway. We'll have a new, magnificent new atrium for Amtrak passengers, because it turns out that inside that station, which occupies a city block, there's an enormous floor space that was covered originally in a glass atrium, and it was the old mail sorting floor. So that becomes the new passenger atrium. Ticketing and baggage, we'll have a new, much improved Acela lounge, all kinds of retail. It'll be open to Amtrak and Long Island passengers principally. It will be a great thing. But what it doesn't do, and this is kind of the last piece of this puzzle, is it doesn't do anything about the fact that every track is crowded all day long. It doesn't do anything about the fragility of the station operation itself. And as we've seen in the last month, it's fragile. Very small incidents can have huge effects. I said this to someone else, there's a chaos theory thing here in that, you know, if a butterfly flaps its wings on a platform in Penn Station, we start holding trains in Secaucus. It's that kind of thing, right? 5-minute delay, 10-minute delay on a train in Penn, the ripple effects go out very quickly. So what do? This is Penn South. This is the block south of Penn Station, south of 32nd, between 7th Avenue and 8th Avenue. We're working on the plans to eventually build the new Penn South. And that's what will give us what the city needs and all of us need, which is additional capacity. It's a very interesting project. The conceptual planning is underway. You can see where Moynihan is. And it's an interesting project in that also when we do this, our intention is to not only build a set of platforms at a certain level, but actually to go down and dig out the space underneath them so that the next time there needs to be expansion, there'll be a place to do that as well. And it'll be engineered to get to from the existing tunnels. It's the last piece of the puzzle in terms of Gateway. In the meantime, as some of you may have seen, it's been an eventful month or two around Penn Station, and we just this morning announced a bunch of initiatives to do some significant shorter-term work. We have some significant infrastructure, track infrastructure needs down there. There's been a long-term renewal program, but we've been trying to do it on weekends. It has not gone as quickly as it turns out ultimately it should have. And there's infrastructure down there that we cannot just keep repairing and waiting another year or two to go ahead and finally replace it. So we're going to be undertaking a program with our partners this summer to do some major work in Penn Station. It will create some amount of schedule change and disruption in the station, but we're going to plan that very carefully with our partners and make sure that everybody knows well in advance of what's coming. It just has to be done. We've also announced that we're bringing in a gentleman whom some of you know, I'm sure, named Tom Prendergast, who recently retired as head of MTA. We're going to contract with Tom, who understands that environment, knows MTA, knows the station, knows us, knows transit, to step back and take a look at a high level for us on how we can better run the station at the passenger level. It is a disjointed, balkanized station. When you get up there with an Amtrak area, a New Jersey Transit area, a Long Island Railroad area, and that creates problems for us, particularly at times when the station gets under stress. So Tom will be leading an initiative to jointly with our partners think about ways to improve that. As part of that, and then separate of it as well, is we are announcing that we want to progress a plan for a coordinated station operating center. Some of you may be aware we have an operating center for dispatch, and all 3 railroads are in there. And our relationships at an operating level are good, but again, we don't have that same kind of central thought process and oversight and control and jointly staffed facility to manage what's going on at the concourse level and make sure that we have common communications protocols, that we have something like common signage, right? All of these things so that the station works better day in, day out, and that we jointly respond to issues when we have them. As part of that, we're going to go back and do a joint review of a lot of other operations in the station, things like, do we have the best process and communication for what do we do with disabled trains? And the answer is we can get better. But all around that and all around safety and security, we're announcing immediate investments in terms of some technology there, as well as stepping back and working not only with our railroad partners, but the folks with emergency preparedness, the police, and all the other interested stakeholders. It's a big program, but Amtrak is the owner and operator of Penn Station. And we take that responsibility very seriously. And we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can, both to ensure the safe and smooth operation of that facility and to make sure that we're all running this in an appropriate way. So that's Gateway. Those are the big projects. This is kind of the crown jewel of infrastructure projects, and it's recognized as such, I think probably by all of you and by a lot of people, that this is something that has to be done. The ROI, overall ROI, has been costed out to be about 4-to-1. We're moving ahead, as you heard, with the money we have on all of these projects. We do have strong commitment from local government, and we have very strong support from the Congress and the governors. It is a race against time for us, particularly the tunnels. We can move forward with construction on a lot of these things very quickly, but we have to figure out how to fund it. The good news to me personally is that everyone recognizes the need for infrastructure investment in this country. And by the way, everybody puts this project near or at the top of the list. We just have that one little issue of how we're going to pay for it. And it's my belief, and I am an optimist by nature, that at least when it comes to Gateway, people will sort that out, and we won't reach the point where a whole lot of people who are sitting on the Jersey side of the river and work in Manhattan won't be able to take New Jersey Transit or Amtrak to Manhattan every day. So that's my story. It's not 3:46 yet, so we're doing well. I don't know if I have any time for questions, Carl, or no, Carl, Norm. And or you want to give me the big hook? I'm good.
Then we can do a question. Sure. And then we're going to walk around there, and you can have something to talk to people while they're eating as well.
I can talk to people while they're eating?
Yes, sir.
That's great.
Yeah.
They can't, if their mouths are full, they can't talk back. I'm happy to take a couple of questions.
There's one right in the back.
Right in the back. I'm wherever. There. Okay.
Yonigan Tuvnik from GIC. Can you just touch on where you see the most significant role that private capital could play in some of these projects?
That is a great question. And it is a place where we are looking very hard. It's somewhat difficult, obviously. Private capital plays a huge role, as you've heard, in kind of all around the stations, right? And making sure that there's fund available to restore and improve the stations, including Moynihan. It's more difficult out on the corridor to generate a model that does that. There clearly can be some kind of additional fees for people who are on the corridor, but it's just hard to toll a train, right, when it goes over a new bridge. Having said that, we're looking at that. We're looking at it from the broader issue of Amtrak in general, in terms of how are there ways to bring private capital in. But having said that, looking at these numbers, the bulk of this money is going to have to be public investment.
Yeah, I heard the Japanese going to do something along your corridor. You're competing with your, or another, Chinese also try to see they can provide the money for you. What's your position?
Well, I'll answer that question in particular and then more on a global level. We have good relationships with some of the Japanese rail companies, and I have in fact met with them. The proposal, I think in particular that you're talking about, is building a new high-speed network, or high-speed train between Washington and New York. And the trick is, I think as all of you know, in order to build true high-speed rail as there is in Japan and in Europe, you have to build a new alignment because the corridor has too many curves to run for long periods of time at sustained high speed. And we also have a lot of traffic on the corridor. The estimate that I saw, and I guess I haven't seen specific proposal, but I saw something on TV about it, is that the estimate's $100 billion to build that corridor. If Amtrak has 100 or billion or less, we can do the same thing. The Japanese have offered some amount of funding, but again, they're not, no one, to my knowledge, has said that they're going to fund anything like even half of it. Because commercially, it's not a venture, right? You're not going to charge enough, even if you charge premium prices, to generate more than a few $1 billion of private capital, and other people are going to have to pay for the rest. So, I think there are certainly alternative proposals. Amtrak itself knows that railroad better than anybody, and if there was $100 billion and we had a Japanese partner, we would be doing that. But let me also go back to the other side of this story, which is just because you build a true high-speed railroad between Washington and New York, you still have to go do Gateway, right? You still have to do a lot of these other things because there's so many commuters out there, and that's not a high-speed rail issue. Folks, getting on at Secaucus or at Newark and transferring and coming in or getting off and going in on path, all of that stuff still has to be there. So in addition to that $100 billion, you've still got, but you've got this other essential critical infrastructure. So we'll see how it plays out. Listen, hey, I haven't been at Amtrak long. I don't have any vested interest in the company per se, other than wanting to make it a great company. So we'll work with anybody. And the same thing, by the way, goes for maglev, right? Which is another idea that's floating out there and has been for a long time. It's the same set of issues. The only thing I'll say about maglev versus rail in general is that rail is a far more flexible technology. And, this is what you've seen in Europe, because even the TGV, when it reaches the outskirts of Paris, goes back on conventional infrastructure. And that's the way most, not all, but most high-speed rail in Europe and other places, not necessarily the Shinkansen, but a lot of places, just because the one thing you don't really want to do because of how difficult it would be is try to create another Union Station in where Union Station is today. So, make sense? Yeah. Other questions? Any? Hearing none? You want to eat? All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.